Okay, in this clip I'm going to step you through how I would build a differential. So start off with spur gear, simply pop all the balls in. Now these are just standard steel balls, but you can purchase ceramic ones. Ceramic ones last for ages. You get to rebuild the diff a couple of times with ceramics. These generally last one set of diff plates to one set of balls, but if you use the ceramic diff balls you can get at least 2 or 3 rebuilds out of it with the same diff ring. So diff ring onto the axle and bearing, and then what I do with the diff gear and the balls, this using just my own Zen diff grease, I put a very dollop of grease on every single ball. I'll do that on both sides. Doesn't need too much. And pop on the diff gear. There we go. I need another bearing. This bearing will end up going into pressing into the hub. Another diff ring. Nice good fit. On she goes. Another bearing goes inside the top of the hub. Now this bit does take a little bit of attention just to make sure you get it around the right way. Here our diff thrust washer. Open side to the top, little flange side to the bottom. In she pops. Now then, thrust race. When you get a thrust race, there are 2 thrust washers. One of them, the inside diameter is slightly larger than the other one. Now the larger side has to go on first, because that's the washer which will actually rotate around the actual axle itself. So it has to be the larger washer. And then generally with the actual thrust bearing itself, you need to have it so the balls are actually facing outwards towards the diff nut, because they're slightly offset in the cage, and if you do it the other way it will rub on the washers, so it goes on that way. And then for grease on these, I don't use clear, I just use some black grease. I don't fill it up, I just put a tiny amount between each of the balls on the thrust bearing, just so they're all nicely covered in black grease like that. And goes the top cone. In it goes. Now then, cone washers. Again, I always tend to prefer to put it so the wider side of the cone washer goes on first, so it's kind of pointing upwards, and then the second cone washer pointing downwards. Now you may read many manuals where they have a different way, or you have them so they compress against each other on the wide side. My personal preference is to do it this way. I always find the diff seats better if you do it this way. And then diff nut on. Now when you put the diff nut on, don't just wind it on. Don't just crank it all the way down and expect the diff to be good straight away. What I like to do is wind it down until I can feel it just touch the washers there. So there's no pressure on there yet, and just move the diff. Reason being, if anything wasn't seated properly and you just wound it in, you'd damage the diff before you've even started. So just get it so it just touches, just work the diff a little bit, get the grease moving, and all of a sudden you'll feel the diff. There it goes, diff will free up. Just give it a little pinch just so we've got a tighter action. There we go. And then I get asked quite a bit, how do you set the diff tension? Well, I tend to hold the axle in one hand, hold the hub in the other hand, just with my thumb just push it. As you can hear the diff slipping. That generally is what causes the damage to the diff and what wears the diff out. So because you can just hear that slip just a little bit, I will just nibble the diff nut a tiny bit more. Still free and nice. That's now lock solid, but the action is still good and free. Nothing wrong with that at all. Now that will change, because obviously you've got a new diff plate, you've got new diff balls, you've got a new thrust bearing. That setting will change. So my advice is you go out and do a run, then come back and just check it. And if it needs adjusting or just nip it up a little bit, but just try it with your hands just to make sure it doesn't slip. But that's all we do to build a diff.